Hi guys, welcome to the Heart of David. Hope you guys are doing good today. There's the title of today's video is guys, it's not an easy title. The First Jewish Revolt Against Rome, by Jared W. Ludlow. And so that's going to be the topic. And thank you to the person who watched my video. I forget it was my last video, and pardon me for forgetting your ID. But you know, you said you're close to getting to the truth and stuff like that. And you know, I think it was in response to the book of Revelation written for, and you said you should probably read the Jewish Revolt. So I read the first one, and I know some of the history, but this is the first one, and I'm going to read that, and I'll probably do the other one too. If I hope it's the same author. This is great. I think you guys will appreciate this. It's long though. So, as usual, I'm going to say some topics first, and then I'm going to get to this. So if you want to get to this, you're going to have to fast forward. A few things. I said in another video that I'm going to read to you a list of all the different things that I go through. And if you only knew, I don't actually feel good like wanting to do it. I will do it, but it's to give you hope and to show that what God did for me is a miracle. When you hear them all, you'll wonder how I'm even on this camera. I'm not kidding you. But you know, I don't want to feel like I'm exalting suffering. You can also look back to I Shouldn't Be Alive part 1 to 4 to see some of that. This is more of a summary of those things, of the reasons why all that stuff happened. I want to make sure I remember. I probably should have written these down, but I'll just get right to this. You know how I was assaulted just over 2 weeks ago now, and no one deserves to be assaulted. And there's two things, okay? There's assault and there's battery. Those are two different things. Assault, someone can be threatening you in your face, bearing down on you, putting you in a place where you know you can't leave, type thing. That's assault. Battery is when they hit you. Assault and battery. It was both. And when you hear me read the things that I suffered with, you might understand. I don't talk to many brothers and sisters in person because I have a very demanding life. I do sometimes, of course, but I wanted to know your opinion on something. And if you knew the things that I was trying to protect that day, I'll just say it very briefly. I was going through a tunnel on my mountain bike. A guy was smoking weed. I saw a child go right by him. There was no room. It was all the marijuana smoke in their face, and that kind of made me mad. It made me mad anyways because I don't want to be subjected to your drugs. You know, you have to inhale it. You have to put your shirt over your face, but that's besides the point. It was inside the tunnel. And so where I live, in an enclosed space, a tunnel, and in parks, you can't smoke weed. I don't bother people. I'll say something if they're in my face, though. After I said that, I was on my mountain bike with a helmet and my backpack, and then it went from 0 to 100. And the thing is that this assault, where he was bearing down on me, threatening me, lasted about 4 full minutes. So that's not a regular assault. It lasted a long time, and all I could do was, if this guy starts punching me, then I have to do something. My adrenaline was at as top as it goes for 4 full minutes. That's my guess of how long it was, because it was long. He would go away, come back, go away, come back, no more than 10 or 15 feet. And then the very last time he came back, he pushed me against the wall as hard as he could. And I was waiting for his hands. He didn't. If he would have done that, that's what I would have done. Otherwise, I had to protect my spinal inflammation, my scar tissue in my spine, a neck that's virtually destroyed by nerve damage. So this is what I'm saying. It did affect me. It really affected me. For about 5 days, first 3 days for sure, but it did last about 5 days. I couldn't breathe. I was shallow breathing. It was bad, and I thought it was going to be like permanent. How am I left now? I'm left like I walk out my building, and as soon as I walk out my building, like I'll push the door and I'll look like that real quick. I already had PTSD before, but this guy induced a different kind, right? You can get all different kinds from different situations. So that's what happened. He induced PTSD, and he's made some of my physical health worse too. And when he did that and he pushed me anyways, I sustained damage to my upper back and my neck. That did go away. I'm thinking about taking this guy to court, pressing charges. I'm waiting for charges. I'm still waiting. After 2 weeks, I have a witness too, a partial witness you might call it, because he saw me right after. Here's my point. You're going to say, why would you do that, as a born-again Christian? Why wouldn't you just forgive him? You weren't there. You didn't see what happened. I didn't deserve that. I told him my spine was inflamed with scar tissue, because if he touches me, I could go paralyzed if it's bad enough. That could have happened. I warned him. He didn't care. So I had to do investigation to see what. I've been thinking about this, and I studied about this. I looked in the Old Testament where the answer lies, and what Paul says is that it's small matters Paul's talking about, and that's inside the body of Christ, very petty things. I already know that we are worthy of damages. That's what the Old Testament says. And you're going to go to Jesus, I understand. But it's inside. So the New Testament says it's inside, actually. It does. Because I had to go and look at born-again lawyers. Because there are the born-again lawyers. So if I can get charges pressed, then I can. A lawyer said he's willing to take it on. That's what he told me. Now I want you to consider that I walk out my door and I have to go through the very same tunnel. I have to go through the same ways. I don't drive. I just want to know what you guys think, because I haven't asked anybody. I understand about forgiveness and stuff like that. I haven't had an opportunity to speak to this guy. I want to see him face to face. I do. I want an opportunity to do that. I want to know why he did that. Can't just let people go just like that. I'm a very forgiving person, but when it comes to a person warning you that you have inflammation in your spine, but yet he chose to push my shoulder and my bike into a wall. I could only protect my body. That's all I could do. I wasn't afraid. I was, my adrenaline was as very high as it gets. And there was something else I was going to say. I'm going to get a call, and just please fast forward, because I'm going to have to go into a different room. It's a very important call. I can't pause on here. I can pause on where I do my video editing, but if I take this and put it on my video editing, the Windows, this is Windows, so you can't pause. Windows recording, it for some reason takes like a data upload. So give me a second, and again, this is so interesting. So for 3 days, I had a pinched nerve up in my upper back, and he put out my back for 3 days. And I just healed a 5-month-long back strain by that point. So, the first Jewish revolt against Rome. This is good, and thank you for recommending that, because at first I'm like, well, maybe I should study it anyways, and I'm glad I did. When Jews of the Roman province of Judea initiated a revolt against Rome in AD 66, so that's the first one, the results were catastrophic, and had Matthew 24 is going to come into play into this. I'll do my best. It doesn't mean it fits, but we'll investigate. This might be 2 or 3 videos. I'll put it in the description box how you can read it. Lingering effects on both Jews and Christians. While the revolt occurred some 3 decades after the lifetime of Jesus, isn't it something that there it is in the Bible? How did the Jews not see that and understand, right? Is nonetheless important for understanding the development of early Christianity and the text of the New Testament. There are also significant connections between the first Jewish revolt and some of the prophecies in the New Testament, most notably the Olivet Discourse, recorded in Matthew 24. So when people say it was fulfilled in 70 AD, some of it seems that it could be. Listen to the evidence. I know Matthew 24, I understand that's also a prophecy of the very end. I understand. And then compare Mark 13, Luke 21. Now, I'm going to say this, don't let this turn you off because it means nothing to me. It's Joseph Smith, Joseph Smith of the Mormons, right? He's making commentaries. Not to say that some of them are wrong, but I will... don't worry, this history is correct. If there's something that doesn't belong, I'll tell you. Well, you'll see yourself. This chapter will review the major impetuses for the Jewish revolt, summarize its major events and figures, and sketch its lasting impacts on both Judaism and Christianity. Josephus, the Jewish historian, AD 37 to 100, is the primary source for the events leading up to the Jewish and during the Jewish revolt, both in Jerusalem as Joseph ben Matthias. He was a son of a priest and a descendant of the Hasmoneans. He was well educated, having spent some time learning from the Essenes. Remember, those Essenes were so strict. So strict. They lived out in the desert. They were very strict at what they did. And anyways, I can't get into the Essenes, but when he was 26 years old, he traveled to Rome and was impressed with its size and grandeur. As a dominant regional power, he became an important writer and scholar, somewhat bridging the gap between the Jews and the Romans. By the end of his career, he had written 4 key works: Jewish Antiquities, a summary of Jewish history for the non-Jewish world, the life of Flavius Josephus, his autobiography, Against Apion, an apologetic work for defending Jewish belief against aspects of Greek thought, and Jewish War, the key account of the Jewish revolt. While his eyewitness account of the revolt is a vital source of information, a number of historians have come to question his motives and agenda since he began the war as a Jewish general in the Galilee, but later surrendered to the Romans and became a Roman citizen and friend of Titus and Vespasian. They were under Nero. Friend of Titus and Vespasian, Roman generals during the revolt and later emperors of the Roman Empire. His traitorous actions raised suspicions about his purpose and reliability in writing his later account of the revolt, Jewish War. Again, thank you for recommending this, because now I go and read the next revolt. I'm glad, because I knew some of this, but I didn't know all of this for sure. Many are quick to accuse him of enriching himself on a project of Roman propaganda. We can't be sure though, right? However, eminent Josephus scholar Steve Mason believes this perspective may misinterpret Josephus' intentions. How can we know so far off? We can just make our own opinions. While Josephus did gain some advantages from his close work with the Romans, he didn't necessarily gain more than others in similar situations, so he's in the spotlight. He's a general too. Other Jews also received Roman citizenship, and teachers regularly received a stipend, accommodation, and relief from taxation. In addition to these common benefits, Josephus did receive some land in Judea, but nothing extravagant. While his work was flattering towards Vespasian and Titus, such deference was common among contemporary historians. Mason argues that it wasn't written merely as propaganda. Rather, having been on both sides of the conflict, Josephus uniquely knew issues from both camps and seems to be trying to strengthen his fellow Jews facing increasing tension from the extreme patriotism in Rome. It appears to be a coherent response to a hostile post-war situation for Judeans in the 70s. Pardon me. So it's about 9 pages. So it'll be over 2 videos. I do get worse as I eat more. My videos, you know, I spend a lot of time eating, because I have to eat slow. So pardon that. It is hard to deal with. Cause of the Jewish revolt. The cause. What caused the Jewish revolt? It's nearly impossible to point at one precipitating factor. So a review of various causes leading up to the outbreak of war is necessary. Of course, there never would have been a Jewish revolt if the Romans under Pompey had not conquered the region in 63 BC and incorporated Judea into the Roman Empire. I wonder if God would have allowed that. I wonder if that's why it didn't happen. You think of the Maccabean revolt, right? In any event, the Jews did not rebel until more than 130 years later. While they could have resisted Roman rule and taxation from the beginning, many Jews from the time of Roman arrival until the revolt accommodated themselves to the Romans. In fact, the Romans initially ruled the area under a local vassal king, Herod. See Matthew 2 and Luke 1. Herod bears responsibility for bringing a new elite to power while effectively ending the old order of the Hasmoneans, the descendants of the great Maccabeans. Wow, what a story the Maccabees was, whose zealousness ignited Jewish aspirations for independence and religious revival. This new elite worked closely with the Romans, thereby sowing seeds of disapproval among the other Jewish groups and segments of the Jewish populace. These seeds, so you'd be understandably angry after rule that worked. These seeds germinated for several decades until they burst forth from the soil of discontent as Jews turned against their fellow Jews when they felt betrayed their traditions and leadership. Okay. Thus some see the revolt in a lengthy trajectory of zeal for God against those deemed disloyal to him, a kind of holy war. Was it Jesus who said, Simon the Zealot? I don't know if he approaches the apostle that way, No, that's just in you know, something like The Chosen, the zealot. You know, you're zealous for. Was he a hardliner, right? Was he one of those types of people? You don't blame them, right? They just want their traditions back. From Phinehas, from Phineas in Moses' time, or Phineas, I don't know how to pronounce that, I'd have to see. In Moses' time, Numbers 25, 6-11, to the Maccabees preceding the Roman arrival, to the zealots of the revolt. The zealots are also known variously as the Fourth Philosophy, the Sicarii, and Jewish nationalists. They just love their nation. Nothing wrong with that. This defensive attitude out of loyalty to God and His commandments led to strong militaristic responses. As part of this religious zeal, some look for a Messiah or deliverer who could liberate the people from the Romans, as the Maccabees had done earlier against the Greeks. Yet this, I have to believe that what happened with the Maccabees was God was with them. You have to look at all the battles they won, and it's just impossible. Like, yet this catalyzing religious zeal does not explain why the revolt broke out when it did, especially since the group that came to be known as zealots was actually opposed by many religious leaders in Jerusalem. You know, you're too much of a hardliner, such as the high priests. Why did it take more than a century after Roman arrival for the Jews to revolt? Good question. For a chronologically closer cause of the revolt, some scholars point to the inept, corrupt, and harsh Roman procurators stationed over Judea in the 1st century, especially those following the death of the Herodian ruler Herod Agrippa I in 44 AD. See Acts 12. When Jewish pagan hostilities throughout Judea grew stronger, especially in Caesarea Maritima, rebellion naturally followed. Primary texts recount the procurators' injustices and insensitivity towards the Jews, which built up frustration at not having their interests protected. This brewing frustration, and remember during all this time in the Maccabees and all that, they didn't have any prophets, for 400 years. Just remember that until John. But great things came from the Maccabee revolt, though. This brewing frustration fed into the hands of extreme religious, nationalistic, zealot leaders in Jerusalem like Eleazar, who felt emboldened enough to withhold the daily sacrifice for the emperor. Keep these things in mind. I had never heard that. When the Roman auxiliary garrison was massacred in Jerusalem, Emperor Nero had little choice but to respond with force administered by Vespasian and Titus. So they were father and son, I think. I think that's what it said. Besides these political conflicts with the government, there were plenty of issues with Jewish society that fed the discontent. The later rabbinic literature highlights societal hatred and ills, such as breakdown of values and materialistic concerns, as major causes for the revolt. You know what? While I was reading this, I'm like, whoa. I am reading what's happening today. This is what's happening in the States right now in the world. The more I read about this, you know, the cycles of society, when it gets to, you know, and by the way, my video was taken down because I think I mentioned the, you know what, now I can't even say these things for like misinformation or whatever. I was just giving my experience of what happened to me. I had an allergic response, and they took that down. They took down part 2 of examples of why it's the end of days. I put a lot of work into that, man. Like the Pride, you know, like both in Toronto and California, you can walk around naked on that day. That's where we are. How far are we away from Greece, where, you know, their Olympics were all naked? Can you imagine wrestling naked? That's the way it was. So, not to give you any ideas, right? Other socioeconomic factors exacerbated by a famine in 48 AD, Acts 11:28, heavy taxation and population increase, all of which put greater demand on resources, led to higher incidence of brigandage. I'd have to look that up. I don't know what that means. A greater rift between the rich and the poor. So is that happening now? And economic instability. And by the way, those are happening on purpose. They were done on purpose. You know whose policies that was. It didn't have to happen, let's put it that way. I watched it all. And in addition, several general causes played a role in the backdrop to this conflict. The presence of Roman officials, the tension between Jewish tradition and Greco-Roman influence, Hellenism, and messianic expectations. According to the Roman writer Suetonius, as well as Josephus, these messianic expectations included an oracle, or the belief spread throughout the Orient that it was time for someone arising from Judea to rule the world. Matthew 24 is going to come into play here. If they say don't look here, if they say don't look there, right? And that's what this person said to me. I don't know, was it that person? Anyways, that may be 2 different people writing me a message, but the inhabitants of Judea took this to refer to themselves, but in hindsight it was interpreted as portending Vespasian's rise to emperor. Beyond these general causes, more immediate causes fanned the flames of these later general issues and led to a violent rebellion. These immediate causes included tension between Roman procurators and Jewish leaders, economic strife, and inner Jewish strains. I'll put this in the description box, it's very interesting. What proved to be different with this revolt compared to the earlier Maccabean revolt in 167 BC and later Bar Kokhba revolt in AD 132 was the lack of organization, planning, and leadership. So it wasn't like the Maccabees. They didn't have the proper leaders. A review of pivotal moments in the Jewish-Roman relationship and their concomitant effect on early Christians will illuminate the mounting frustration and discontent and the resulting disorganization that precipitated the Jewish revolt against Rome in the mid-1st century. So I'm on page 3 now, just to let you know how far we are into this. So, Roman-Jewish relations. By AD 66, the Jews had been under various forms of Roman control for over 100 years. With the exile and death of most of the Herodian family, Roman officials had increasingly become the face of occupation in the land. Gessius Florus reigned from 64 to 66 AD, installed as procurator of Judea by Nero in 64 AD. So, 2 years before the revolt. exacerbated tensions between the Jewish and local Hellenistic communities. Rather than listening to Jewish complaints of harassment and discrimination and impartially addressing them, he often punished the accusers and profited thereby. This would be the last straw for me too. For many Jews came when Florus took, so the procurator, so you know, like you think of, is that procurator the same as the, yes it is, right? Like Pilate, that'd be the equivalent of Pilate, Pontius Pilate. Took 17 talents, doesn't say what, of gold or silver, from the Jerusalem temple treasury. Doesn't matter, right? Jewish protests of this theft led to the arrest of Jewish leaders, thousands of whom were whipped and even crucified. Isn't this kind of what's happening now? They're taking your money and they're blaming you. Were even crucified despite many of them holding Roman citizenship. It's pretty bad. Despite efforts by the Herodian elite, Bernice and Agrippa II, see Acts 24 and 26, to prevent escalation and to seek more just treatment, by Florus, their calls went unheeded and eventually the crowds turned against them. So you remember, the 64, they still had 6 years to repent about Jesus. Eventually the crowds turned against them, expelled them from Jerusalem, and burned their palaces. The Jewish population of Jerusalem exploded in anger at Florus's actions, and the zealot leaders capitalized on this opportunity to rally the populace to their side. So if you don't have proper organization, if you don't have someone like the Maccabees, which was good because they had a big family, right? The zealots, perhaps originating in protest over Quirinius' tax reform in 6 AD, had been seeking to expel the Romans so they could be solely under God's rule. Josephus also referred to some rebels as Sicarii, or dagger men, or dagger wielders. I remember watching in The Chosen, this isn't scriptural, but I remember watching in The Chosen that, it shows Jesus talking to, I think it was Simon, he had a dagger and he told him to put the dagger away. And by the way, The Chosen is not scriptural, okay? I'm not going to tell you not to watch it. I'm not going to say that, but certainly they're putting things in there that never happened. So dagger wielders, that's why that was in there, because their secret assassinations terrorized their fellow countrymen in hopes they would join the fight against the Romans, as well as Romans. We can't blame people for things that happen in such a tumultuous time, right? They just want their homes back. They want things the way it was, no different than we want things back to the way. I'm not saying violence is good. Menahem ben Yehuda and Eleazar ben Yair were key zealot leaders. Eleazar, a priest, had been primarily responsible for halting the daily sacrifice. Halting the daily sacrifice. This is what I'm just keep that in mind. To the emperor. I don't know what that means. Eleazar, a priest, had been primarily responsible for stopping the daily sacrifice to the emperor. Were they doing that to the emperor? For the emperor? I don't know. I'll have to look. Why would they be doing it to God? Why would they be doing it to the emperor? I have to look that up right after this. He was supported by the lower priests and revolutionary leaders against the traditional high priestly authorities, thus turning it partly into a class struggle. Eleazar was able to take control of the temple and lower city of Jerusalem, thereby shutting out the high priest from the temple. Menahem came from a father and grandfather who also zealously resisted the Romans and Herodians. When the revolt began, he held some forces to Masada along the Dead Sea and attacked a Roman garrison there, capturing a large cache of weapons. Emboldened from his victory, Menahem marched towards Jerusalem, took over Antonia fortress with its forces from Herod Agrippa II, and besieged Herod's palace and towers. The attack on the Roman garrison in Jerusalem was matched by a Gentile attack, on Jews in Caesarea that resulted in 20,000 deaths. Gentile attack. I don't know what that means exactly. Various cities suddenly ignited in Jew versus Gentile attacks throughout the Galilee and Golan and along the Phoenician coast. The area under Herod Agrippa II largely escaped these violent outbursts. Menahem, who had early success against the Romans, may have become too overbearing with royal pretensions and was killed by fellow revolutionaries. Jewish infighting continued as various leaders vied for control of the city in the revolt, particularly between moderates, who were primarily aristocratic. You can see the problem here, right? Jerusalemites that were more cosmopolitan and pro-Roman and wanted to capitulate to Rome. What do you do? It almost seems like you would have to have zealots, and they would have to take over and tell people what to do. If you didn't do it, such thing, blah, 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 blah. There's, it's just like the rich and poor class, right? How are you going to make a rich person fight for you? I'm talking if you're looking to take back your country from being dominated. Give me a sec. This is so interesting, I find. If I get a call, I will come back. I'm waiting for a call. You call somewhere and you have to be on a wait. You put your number in, they have to call you back. Some places are very busy. That's why I have to take it. Jewish infighting continued as various leaders vied for control of the city in the revolt, particularly between moderates who were primarily aristocratic, cosmopolitan, I read that, and resisting the zealots. Keep in mind, can you picture there's like rich people going over to the Romans and saying, hey, we'll do this, or, like they're not nationalistic, they don't, they have a big fight on their hands, never mind that, right? Keep in mind that this narrative is told and propagated by Josephus, who may have colored the story with his agenda and personal, you have to keep that in mind, bias. While scholars largely accept Josephus's narrative, it behooves us to remember the anti-zealot perspective from which he wrote. Right? Maybe he was not for it, and he had to speak against it to be in the position he ended up in. Roman military response to the revolt. It's getting hard. The Romans responded to these initial zealot victories by sending military reinforcements from Syria. What was expected to be an easy Roman victory, the initial march into Jerusalem was successful. It turned into a disaster when the Romans suddenly retreated toward the coast and were ambushed near Beth Horon, losing some 6,000 troops and a significant amount of equipment. There was no turning back now for the Jews, and many pro-Roman Jews fled Jerusalem. On the other side, the Romans had to reassess their response and decided to send in a very strong military force under the experienced leadership of Vespasian. Sorry, I said that wrong before. Vespasian came from an equestrian family and gained fame as a military leader in the conquest of Britain. No small thing. Very hard tribes to break there. Following his military victories in Britain, Vespasian spent time governing in Africa, managing his finances of his estate, and even hiding from Emperor Nero for fear of his life, as you should. Remember I told you he burned someone in that bronze bull with a fire underneath it? Wow, man. And that's in Revelation. Antiochus. Eventually he was elected to lead a sizable army to put down the revolt in Judea. Alongside his son Titus and 4 legions, Vespasian began to counter the counter. So 4 legions would be what? The legion would be like 6,000. So it was 24,000 men, but it could certainly be more. Let's look that up quickly. I should know that, but it can be different. How many people in a legion? So it can be much. The Romans went from anywhere from 1,000 to 11,000 fighting men. A legion can have, so they could have 40,000 men. They could at full strength. How many soldiers makes a legion? So I was right. Approximately 5,200 men, sometimes 6,000. That's as much as you want to make it, and you also have to consider the people that you have in reserve too. Eventually he was selected to lead a sizable army to put down the revolt in Judea, alongside his son Titus and 4 legions, so let's just say 30,000 men. Vespasian began the counterattack in the Galilee. While this region was not where the recent unrest had started, it made strategic sense for the Romans coming from the north to secure that region first. The Jews knew that was happening and worked to defend the Galilee region. So the Jews knew. Many Galileans fought because of hatred for the large Gentile-influenced cities. Cities there such as Sepphoris and Tiberias. Older settlements resented newer ones, and the indigenous population held animosity towards the foreigners. Yet even with these sentiments, there was no unanimity on war with Rome. That's the problem. When war finally broke out, Jews were little match, especially on the battlefield, for the initial brunt of Vespasian's forces. They should have done what Hannibal did. Hannibal was so successful. Hannibal of Carthage, he had one eye, because he would ambush the Romans, and he just picked them off. And it took the Romans a long time to realize that. It was hard to beat the Romans on an open field. One of the local generals, Josephus, prepared the city of Jodaphat or Jotapata, and though they held out for 47 days, so that's Josephus who wrote the book, the 3rd longest siege of the revolt after Jerusalem and Masada, the Jews there eventually fell in bloody defeat and enslavement. Matthew 24 will come into this, so you can do some comparisons yourself. I don't know how much I'm going to go into this because I may just go halfway. It was very tough for me. It was at this point that Josephus defected to the Romans and began chronicling the war on the other side. Guys, I'm going to take a break here. I'll be back in 1 minute. This is very interesting. You don't want to miss these next parts. I have to grab my phone just in case. I deal with a lot of kidney stones. When you gotta go, you gotta go. I wake up like 5 times a night. So it was at this point Josephus defected to the Romans and began chronicling the war from the other side. With the fall of Galilee, thousands of refugees and zealots fled to Jerusalem. And by late spring of AD 68, all the areas from Judea, Perea, and Idumea were securely in Roman hands. Yet right when the revolt could have been snuffed out, Nero died. Wow. Listen to this. Nero died and a succession crisis broke out in Rome, thereby also ending Vespasian's mandate for leading the war in Judea. Can you imagine that? That's like a Hail Mary. Yeah, I understand what happened to Nero, but can you imagine that all had to do with God? Maybe they were giving, oh man, an opportunity to. Okay, I'll be back, guys. Hello. Give me a sec, guys. I'm waiting for someone to come to the phone. You know, it calls you back, and then they make you wait. What the hell, man? I don't want to play it either. So, with the fall of Galilee, thousands of refugees and zealots fled to Jerusalem, and by late spring of AD 68, all the areas of Judea, Perea, and Idumea, they were in Roman hands. Nero died. So, a nearly 2-year reprieve for the Jerusalem inhabitants came as Rome faced its own struggle over leadership, with Vespasian ultimately coming out on top and marching into Rome as its next emperor in AD 69. So not many people would want to mess with him because, look, he defeated Britain, right? So meanwhile, the Jewish leadership of the revolt suffered its own conflicts, becoming bifurcated between moderates ruling Jerusalem and revolutionaries trying to upend Roman control and influence. Why did they do this? Like, they call you back to make you wait. The zealots spread terror throughout the city. The moderates made efforts to stem their tide. The zealots spread terror throughout the city as the moderates made efforts to stem their tide. The zealots then invited the Jews of Idumea to join them. Remember who's in Idumea? At that point, that would be the Edomites. Well, they were not pure Edomites anymore, because remember what God said about the Edomites, right? They're mixed in with Jewish people now, after a certain time. Butchery among the populace, including moderate leaders and the high priest, ensued. Those who could escape deserted Jerusalem. Think of Matthew 24, right? At this high point of zealot control, their coalition fell apart with various groups controlling different parts of the city and temple complex. The siege of Jerusalem. In the midst of such revolutionary discombobulation, the Roman siege of Jerusalem continued under the leadership of Vespasian's son Titus. So while he was there, while he went to become emperor, during the 7-month siege by 4 Roman legions, the zealots became more desperate in their efforts to turn the compatriots to their cause, and even resorted to burning the city's food supply. They burned their own food supply to force others to join the fight. That's discombobulation. I'll be back, guys. Hello?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Denise. My age is under 34938. You can call me from that department if you want to contact. I have a contact number.
Yeah, you know what? The number that you're saying doesn't match the number. It's like 729. Yeah. I just want to say it's so hard to get in touch. That woman was rude, man. You know, you get people on the phone sometimes, you never know what you're going to get. All right, let's read some more. I didn't get my question really answered, but just give me a sec. Sorry, guys. You know, like you expect the person who you're going to talk to, government employee, to be nice, you know, and answer like that. But if someone's like, what? You know, like, come on, don't you know? That's what I just got. So they burn the food supply. With little food under, they burn their own food supply to force their people to capitulate to coming together. It's not the way to do it, but the inhabitants of Jerusalem starved, tried to escape, or waited for the inevitable end. Josephus described in ghastly detail the effects of the siege. So let's think of Matthew 24. The Jews, unable to leave the city, were deprived of all hope of survival. The famine became more intense and devoured whole houses and families. The roofs covered with women and babies too weak. This is Josephus while he's on the Roman side. Let me check that again. So I don't know at what point of Josephus this is, because he switched sides. So I'm guessing it's when he's on the Roman side. I don't know. With women and babies too weak to stand, the roofs were covered with women and babies too weak to stand. The streets full of old men already dead, young men and boys swollen with hunger, haunted the squares like ghosts and fell wherever faintness overcame them. To bury their kinsfolk was beyond the strength of the sick, and those who were fit shirked the task because of the number of the dead and uncertainty about their own fate. Wow. For many, while burying others, fell down themselves. And many set out for their graves before their hour struck. Wow. In their misery, no crying, no weeping or lamentation was heard. There was so much misery. Hunger stifled emotion, with dry eyes and grinning mouths. Those who were slow to die watched those whose end came sooner and probably was jealous. Deep silence enfolded the city, and a darkness burned with death. Great difficulty, the Roman forces finally regained control of the Antonia fortress and turned their sights on the temple. It's getting very difficult to speak. Titus offered peace overtures to the Jewish forces inside the temple complex, allowing some, this gets interesting, allowing some, particularly from the upper classes and priestly families, to leave. Owing to a lack of animals, the Jews, for the first time during the revolt, discontinued their daily sacrifices at the temple. I don't know what this means. I can't pretend, but I can look. I may have to do that in another video. So it happened. Does that have to do with Matthew 24? You know, I kind of get angry sometimes. Not angry, but frustrated at the separations in Matthew 24. I think I know how to separate it correctly. But I'll have to look at that maybe now, but we'll see. There could be double, you know, because there's double fulfillments. It becomes very tough, and everyone thinks they know, right? Discontinued their daily sacrifice at the temple. Josephus describes Roman leaders discussing whether they should destroy the temple. It's a good testament, right? Or leave it as a monument to the Roman victory. But it's unclear whether Titus intended to destroy the temple or whether its destruction simply happened in the course of the battle. Well, what I know is they did it to melt all the gold out of it. It's a lot of gold. But it's unclear whether Titus... fighting continued mercilessly with great loss of life on both sides. The Roman battering rams failed against the massive stones surrounding the temple. Fire was finally set to the temple gates, leading to the eventual destruction of the magnificent sanctuary in 70 AD. That's why I say, how did the Jews don't look at Matthew 24? Maybe they do and they just say, we don't know, and this was written. According to the Jewish calendar, this happened on the 9th of, listen to this, the 9th of Av. Traditionally, the same day Solomon's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians and commemorated as Tishba B'Av, one of the saddest days in the Jewish calendar. Like, that's insane. I heard that before, but it's reminding me again. I forgot about that. The Romans finally overcame the weakened Jewish forces, and a bloodbath ensued with incredible carnage throughout the city. Josephus said that around the altar, the heap of corpses grew higher and higher, while down the sanctuary, steps poured a river of blood. I heard this stuff throughout the Nazi campaigns all throughout Europe and especially Russia. Horrible stuff. And the Japanese and in China, rivers of blood in the streets, so bad. There's nothing worse than what happened there. Nothing. A river of blood, and the bodies of those killed at the top slithered to the bottom. Eventually the Romans were able to dismantle the temple, destroy the temple complex, and push the massive stones off the temple and onto the market street below. How long is this? I guess I'll try to keep going and then just finish off a little bit, because I gotta get water and food into me. It's a real challenge doing these videos because I'm pretty much always eating. Because I have abdominal disorders. I have 4 of them. I have to eat slow. And I have to make my schedule of, you know, taking meds, taking food, going out and walking. It's very tough to do. So there's not much time I really have just to sit here and talk without eating, and there it gets tough too after a while. And push the massive stones off the Temple Mount and onto the market street below, where they still rest. The destruction of the Jerusalem temple was devastating for the Jewish community and led to a new worship focus by the rabbis without the temple and its associated cult system. Cultic. What came to be known as Rabbinic Judaism. The rest of Jerusalem proceeded to fall into the Roman hands as the Romans rejected any bids for surrender. I'm looking at this picture here, and it shows a Roman ramp leading up to Jerusalem. That's cool. I didn't know that kind of stuff still remained. It's so cool looking at Jerusalem. I just seen like on the hill, like the way it is. I would still like to go there. I thought about asking someone I knew closely to go with me. I guess maybe now's not the time. I wonder if I could actually do it. I know I can do it, but would I suffer for it? The rest of Jerusalem proceeded to fall into Roman hands as the Romans rejected any bids for surrender and burned large sections of the city. Only the rebel-held Masada proved challenging for the Romans. It'd be so cool to go there. But eventually it fell, culminating in a mass suicide among the remaining rebels. And by this, I'd love to go to the Mount of Olives, man. And by this last gruesome act, thus ended the first Jewish revolt against Rome. I want to walk where Jesus did. New Testament prophecies of the temple's destruction. So this gets in like Joseph Smith. It doesn't mean that some of the things Joseph Smith said wasn't correct, but anyways, you'll be able to tell, and I'll try to tell you if there's anything. Although I don't think there is anything, because he's talking about Matthew 24, and what he's talking about is probably correct. Although the Jewish revolt and subsequent destruction of the temple happened 3 decades after the time of Jesus, the New Testament records significant prophecies and teachings of Jesus's about the fate of this magnificent edifice. These prophecies were even brought back during Jesus' trial in an attempt to find Jesus' words inflammatory and revolutionary. When one witness claimed, "How did the Jews not know this? I know there's a veil. I understand. How can they not look back and see this?" When one witness claimed, "This fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days." Matthew 26:61. After one visit to the Temple Mount, Jesus made the ominous declaration to his apostles that not one stone of the temple would be left upon another, but rather they would be thrown down. Matthew 24:2, says Joseph Smith. Matthew 1:2-3, Luke 21:6. Naturally concerned, the apostles later asked Jesus, "When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" Matthew 24:3. It seems they wondered if the two events went together. The destruction of the temple and Jesus' return leading to the end of the world. So that is what the apostles were wondering. Their questions led to a lengthy response by Jesus, now recorded in Matthew 24. Compare Mark 13 and Luke 21, and sometimes referred to the Olivet Discourse. It is the Olivet Discourse, because it was delivered on the Mount of Olives. This chapter underwent a major revision as part of the Joseph Smith translation project. So, because I don't believe in Mormonism, all that kind of stuff, just to let you know. It doesn't mean what he's saying is wrong, so if there is something, I'll tell you. Let's just follow this anyways. One of the major results of Joseph Smith, Matthew, is the reordering of some verses so that everything before verse 21 deals with the time period immediately following Jesus' ministry, while everything after 21 prophesies the events connected with Jesus' second coming and the end of the world. Let's take a look in a second. Verse 21 functions as a transitionary verse that separates these events. "Behold, these things I have spoken to you concerning the Jews. And again, after the tribulation of those days, which shall come upon Jerusalem." Let's look at Matthew 24. I have it up. So he's saying 21. Let's start at, let's go for 9. Let's go to 9 to 14 first. This will be the end of this video when I do this. It's getting very tough, guys. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. You'll be hated for this. So a lot of people read this wrong, I think. They'll deliver you up to tribulation and kill you and be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and betray one another and will hate one another. So they're wondering if this had to do with what happened in 70 AD, and it's quite possible when you read all this. It's possible. But don't worry, it's split up. Don't worry, there's stuff for us too. And then many will be offended, betray one another, hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached. It says in all the world, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. I believe that's for the Jews. I really do. But it says in 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come. So looking at this, this is my interpretation of that 9 to 14 double fulfillment. That's what I think it could be. And many agree with that too. Let's look at verse 15. I haven't read further into this article too, so when you read it, you might say, "Oh, I didn't know that." Because up to that time, that was like the worst thing that happened up to that time. It was true. That was horrific what happened. There was like 1 million Jews died. "15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation," so they're wondering if the abomination of desolation was when they stopped that sacrifice. That's what they're wondering. I don't know if it's true. "Spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So, when that happened, by the way, Christians did run away into the mountains. It did happen. I don't know the whole truth to it, though. Again, double fulfillment, possible. "Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house." They're talking to the Jews here, guys, Jerusalem, probably. "And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath." It's probably talking to Jews. So that was verse 20. Here's 21 now. "For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, or ever shall be." Could that be the Jews? It could be. It could be. What happened, what I'm explaining. I'm not even done yet. "Unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." It could have happened in 70 AD. That part could be. Again, it could be a double fulfillment. I have something stuck in my throat. Could be a double fulfillment. Absolutely, it could be a double fulfillment. Once I read this, that article, it could be. "Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here's the Christ,' or 'There, don't believe it,' just follow me. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show." Okay, so in the article, they're wondering, so this was Joseph Smith. And I'm not going to say that, obviously Mormonism isn't the true way. It's actually demonic. But it doesn't mean that he's talking about may not be possible. they're saying in there, and you have to hear more of it first. What happened during that time, there were false people leading people into the desert. You'll have to listen to the rest. I'll try to do it today. Follow it. They were leading people out into the desert and they were getting killed. Look, he's in the inner rooms. Don't believe it. For as the lightning comes from the... So this is a reason why I think it's double fulfillment. Definitely this is for us. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will this coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, or the eagles, there the eagles will be gathered together. I've heard many meanings about that part, that last part. This is the coming of the Son of Man. This is the end of the world. It's talking about here. This is why there's such difficulty with Matthew 24. And if you think you know it, don't be ignorant, because you may not. It's a very difficult passage, but the ones that are very obvious are obvious. So I just heard last night, where the carcass is, the eagles will be gathered. That means in the sky, the Lord meeting us in the air. I don't know if that's true. It's just where Jesus is, we will be found. I'm just going to leave it there. And then it goes in verse 29. I never look anymore to the titles that the people who created this put. I just look at the writings of the Bible. It doesn't, like, you know, they'll say the coming of the Son of Man. It doesn't mean that it is. That's just their interpretation in a title. That title is not from the Bible. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. So this didn't happen. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven. So we know the rest is about the end of time. So I'm just going to stop there. You have to hear the rest. You have to hear the rest of this article first. Maybe I'll move into a bit of it. I had to do that, go through that. Verse 21 functions as a transition verse that separates these events. Behold, I have told you these things concerning the Jews, and again after the tribulation of those days, which shall come upon Jerusalem, emphasis added. Following verse 21, Jesus is warned of tribulation and destruction that will come upon the Jews in Jerusalem. Listen, guys, you have to remember when you're reading Matthew 24 that he's reading it to the Jews. I don't care. Put your feelings aside. He's not speaking to Gentiles. But it doesn't mean that it's not for us either. We can look at these things. You know, we can follow these things. It's important to learn what was given to the Jews and what was for the Gentiles. You have to read Paul's gospel. It is Paul's gospel because it was given to him by Jesus Christ. It doesn't mean the Bible isn't for us. That's not what I'm saying. Jesus talks about false Christs and false prophets who would lead to great iniquity and persecution of the righteous. Perhaps he is alluding to the leaders of the Zealots and others who led the people astray. So you wonder why people say 70 AD this was fulfilled? Matthew 24. It's because of this. And it led the people astray through their charismatic but misguided leadership. Josephus alleges that some of the Jewish leaders' claims misled the people and were responsible for thousands of deaths. There was formed another group of scoundrels in act less criminal, but in intention more evil, who did as much damage as the murderers, the Sicarii, to the well-being of the city. Cheats and deceivers claiming inspiration, they schemed to bring about revolutionary changes by inducing the mob to act as if possessed and leading them out into the desert on the pretense that their God would show them signs of approaching freedom. Wow, what a revelation, eh? So you can't ignore that and look at Matthew 24 the same way again. I don't know. Josephus then describes how various groups of people followed these leaders into the wilderness only to be brutally killed when government officials responded to their rebellions. Later on, Josephus pinned the responsibility of thousands of deaths within the city to false prophets. When the Roman soldiers set fire to the cloister, where thousands, including women and children, had sought refuge and either burned to death or died jumping headlong from the structure. Wow, man. Their destruction was due, so this is Josephus, was due to a false prophet who that very day had declared to the people in the city that God commanded them to go into the temple to receive the signs of their deliverance. A number of hireling prophets had been put up in recent days by the party's chief to deceive the people by exhorting them to await help from God, and so reduce the number of deserters and buoy up with hope those who were above fear and anxiety. So it was the unhappy people were beguiled at that stage by cheats and false messengers of God. Maybe they had good intentions, though. To not, I don't know for certain. It is certain that because of all these factions and false leaders, the violent actions and cruel treatment of even their fellow Jews surely witnessed that the love of many waxed cold. So, where does it say that? As Jesus said it would. See Joseph Smith, I won't. Matthew 1, verse 10. Josephus included many descriptions of the extremes Jerusalem inhabitants would go to take food from their family members and neighbors. I'm going to go all the way through this. Any who tried to desert the Romans faced even worse circumstances. Josephus stated that the entire city was a battleground for plotters and their disreputable followers, and between them the people were being torn to bits like a great carcass. Old men and women, overwhelmed by the miseries within, prayed for the Romans to come and looked forward to the war without, which would free them from the miseries within. You know, when I think of the siege, I think of the siege of, now I forget the name, the one in Russia that happened when Hitler went after. It was the Nazis in Finland. That it was the biggest siege ever, worse than this. The results were of deaths for sure. I'm going to look it up. The siege of Leningrad, of course. Go look at the siege of Leningrad. So let's look at Matthew 24 again and look at wax cold and see if that fits of what Joseph Smith thinks. I have to look through all this again. Oh, it's up. It's right there. Give me a sec, guys. Very difficult. You tell me if this fits that time. I'll try to, I'll start at verse 9. Actually, let's start at number 4 in Matthew 24. And Jesus answered and said, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying I'm the Christ, and will deceive many. You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, so double fulfillment, right? See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. So after those disciples asked that question, when Jesus said that not one stone would be left upon another, they were wondering, would this be the sign of your coming? So we can sit on thrones. So we can rule with you. Saying, I'm the Christ and will deceive many. You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See, you're not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So, it says the end is not yet. That sounds like it's a further, like now. Kind of does. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be various famines, pestilence, earthquakes. So was there earthquakes happening there? I don't think so. In various places. That sounds like now, but it still could be a double fulfillment. These are the beginning of sorrows. It sounds like now to me. Then they'll deliver you up to tribulation, kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And many will be offended. Sure sounds like now. But again, double fulfillment. Betray one another, they certainly did in this story. Hate one another, they did in that story. There were false prophets, both now. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. That sounds like now. And because lawlessness will abound, and there was then, but there certainly is now, double fulfillment, the love of many will grow cold. Just look at the states. Just look at the wars. Look, man, I just got assaulted 2 weeks ago for trying to do something good. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to nations. Then the end will come. It sounds more now to me, but it definitely could be double fulfillment. So tough, guys. To give a detailed account of their outrageous conduct is impossible, but we may sum it up by saying that no other city has ever endured such horrors, and no generation in history has fathered such wickedness. Listen, like I said, I know about all sorts of wars. Go look at the siege of Leningrad. I think the Nazis were worse than this. In the ghettos, I heard stories of Nazis taking babies and slamming them against walls, taking them right from their mother's hands. All you could hear was screaming all throughout. I don't know. I think when you get to a certain level, I don't know. No generation in history. I'm not sure if I agree with this. This is just their view. And like I said, yeah, the Japanese were horrible, man. They would do experiments on you and stuff. Anyways. So with the Nazis. With the Olivet Discourse, Jesus also reiterates a prophecy from Daniel about the abomination of desolation. Antiochus Epiphanes, to me, fulfilled that, which seems to point toward a time when the temple reaches such corruption that it will be destroyed. When you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, then you shall stand in the holy place. Joseph Smith, Matthew 1:12. This prophecy seems to have multiple fulfillments. It is repeated again among the signs of Jesus' second coming in verse 32, and again shall the abomination of desolation spoken by the Daniel the prophet be fulfilled. The only way to avoid the impending destruction, Jesus taught, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, but places designated by God for spiritual and physical refuge. I don't know if I agree with what this is saying, okay? I'm not saying I do. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus commands those who are in Judea to flee into the mountains and not return to take anything from their homes. It will be a time of great tribulation on the Jews and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, such as was not before upon Israel of God since the beginning of their kingdom until this time, nor ever shall be again upon Israel. So, multiple fulfillments to that time. Doesn't mean after. Or wait, no, it says there ever shall be. So, let's just sit and wait, right? But as terrible as those sorrows will be, the Lord will shorten their days for the elect's sake according to the covenant. So not everyone will be destroyed. Although the Christian community would survive and continue, one of its key leaders like Peter, Paul, met martyrs' deaths in Rome during the time of the Jewish revolt, as Nero used Christians as scapegoats, Nero's circus. For some of the problems he faced in the capital, it was truly a time of severe tribulation for the early Christian community. I'm almost done. Let me see what's left. Okay, I may have to do another video. Let me see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think I will. I don't really want to. We'll see here. Doctrine and Covenants 45. It's interesting to note that a revelation very similar to Joseph Smith, I don't condone that, man. Matthew was given again in our day through the prophet Joseph Smith. Okay, so that's where I do not. Joseph Smith is a false teacher, okay? Turn your discernment on here. I'm going to read it anyways. Matthew was given again in our day through the prophet Joseph Smith, so no, he didn't. Now canonized, because I just want to read this. As section 45 of the Doctrine and Covenants, this revelation likewise warns against not being prepared for the end. I would be prepared. I would. We have to be prepared. Keep your lamps lit. But it goes on to promise great things for the righteous, yet even this revelation seems connected to the reordered version. Okay, I'm going to go away from Joseph. I just want to read some interesting stuff. Here we go. I shouldn't have even read that, guys, but there's stuff intertwined in it. The early Christians in Jerusalem impacted the Jewish revolt on the early Christians. The early Christians in Jerusalem were not willing participants in the Jewish revolt against Rome, but were caught up in the turmoil because of their proximate location and similarities to Jews. In the Romans' eyes, there were probably little to distinguish them from Jews. According to early Christian tradition, reordered by Eusebius of Caesarea and Epiphanes, the Christian inhabitants of Jerusalem fled around the beginning of the revolt and made their way across the Jordan River and north to Pella, one of the cities of Decapolis. So I think this is from Josephus. The members of the Jerusalem church, by no means of an oracle given by revelation to acceptable persons there, were ordered to leave the city before the war began and settle in a town in Perea called Pella. To Pella, those who believed in Christ migrated from Jerusalem, as if holy men had utterly abandoned the royal metropolis of the Jews and the entire Jewish land. The judgment of God at least overtook them for their abominable crime against Christ and his apostles, completely blotting out that wicked generation from among men. Whoa! That's Josephus. I'm going to read that. Did you want me to read that again? To Pella, those who believed in Jesus Christ migrated from Jerusalem, and as if holy men had utterly abandoned the royal metropolis of the Jews and the entire Jewish land, the judgment of God at last overtook them for their abominable crime against Jesus Christ and his apostles, completely blotting out that wicked generation from among men. I'm thinking that's Josephus because this is Josephus. This flight could have been a response to Jesus' prophetic injunction to flee the destruction of Jerusalem. While these early Christian sources were earlier deemed reliable, some scholars today question their veracity. They doubt that the Christians were able to move freely throughout the land when the Romans were suppressing a rebellion, and it's unclear why they would be freely received by a Greek city. It doesn't make it untrue. Josephus also recounted that Pella, you would think it probably, a lot of them escaped, right? So that's the reality. Believed these traditions were invented by early Jewish Christians in an effort to strengthen their legitimacy by drawing direct connections with Jerusalem's Christian, maybe they were doing it for a good reason, community. If they didn't flee to Pella, it leaves open the question of what happened to the Christians in Jerusalem and whether they perished alongside their Jewish neighbors. I'm almost done. In some early Christian sources, it appears that the Christians returned to Jerusalem afterward, after AD 70. Eusebius lists the bishops of the Jerusalem community up until Hadrian in AD 132, all of whom had Jewish background: James, Simeon, Justus, Zacchaeus, Tobias, Benjamin, John, Matthias, Philip, Seneca, Justus, Levi, Ephraim, Joseph, and Judas. Following the Second Jewish Revolt in 132 AD, the list of bishops reveals Gentile backgrounds. Conclusion. It's just about a page, 2 paragraphs here. Right to the end, guys. The first Jewish revolt in AD 66 was an enormous, tragic event for the Jewish people in the city of Jerusalem, resulting in the loss of many lives. I think it's about 1 million, and a lot of Romans died too. Not nearly as many, and the destruction of the temple. The Jews sought for independence from the Romans, who had been their overseers for 100 years, over a century. Various factors combined to ignite the rebellion in AD 66. Corrupt procurators, economic struggles, breakdowns of values, heavy taxes, religious fervor, inter-Jewish factional strife. Encouraged by an early victory against a Roman army, the Jews may have become overly confident that their revolt could succeed. They didn't have any proper leadership like the Maccabees did, like a family that you could, good counselors, all that type of stuff. Maybe it was just never meant to happen. I do believe in free will though, but when this happened, they still had time to repent. But a much stronger army was sent against them. There was nothing the Jews could do to stop it. Fractured leadership and lack of planning and organization doomed the revolt. The revolt became a violent nexus between religious zeal and politics. What had begun as hope for God's deliverance and liberation from the Romans turned into a catastrophe, with failures on the battlefield and the love having waxed cold. I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm sure it happened among the people. Furthermore, the temple, as society decays, that's why at the beginning of that, I'm like, look, this is happening now. Furthermore, the temple was desecrated by revolutionaries long before the Romans further desecrated and destroyed it. From a Christian perspective, these events were significant because of prophecies recorded in the New Testament regarding future tribulations among the Jews and the loss of the temple. The Olivet Discourse is one of the most important and likely prophecies by Jesus about both impending and distant future events. Again, I'm going to say here, it's saying Joseph Smith's revision of the Discourse, now known as Joseph Smith. Matthew helps clarify the time frame of the events and associated signs. It provides a window on not only the events surrounding the Jewish revolt, but also future events pertaining to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Isn't that amazing, man? Just as the early Christians had to heed the words of the prophecy and flee to the holy places to avoid the abomination of desolation. I don't know, to tell you the truth. I didn't know that happened, but I also know how brutal it was of Antiochus. That's my guess of what that was. Again, double fulfillment. It will happen again. Everyone disagrees. Or, everyone, guys, we don't know the full truth. Nobody can prove it. Nobody can prove it. It's not worth, it's not worth arguing and fighting over those types of things. Just realize it could be a double fulfillment. It could be a triple fulfillment. So true Christians in the last days will need to stand in holy places for refuge. In such a manner, we just keep our faith in Christ. The elect of the covenant and those who are steadfast will be blessed, even in the midst of tribulation, of great tribulation. So that's what I wanted to read, guys. That was quite long, and I hope you enjoyed that. And I'd like to hear like what I said at the very beginning, which was about an hour and a half ago. Sorry about the hour and 45 minutes ago. Sorry about that I had to take that call. Sometimes I do. I have to eat through my videos, most of them anyway. God bless, guys, and yeah, I'll pray for everyone who watches. I don't know who's going to watch an hour and 45 minutes, but this is a lesson worth knowing so you can look at Matthew 24 in a different way. Bye, guys.